Hey, what is up, everybody? This is Stevie Breach coming to you here. Normally, during the WWE pay-per-views, as the show is going along, they give us a little bit of a preview of what is going to be coming up in the next upcoming month of WWE Network. That way, it's sort of like if you were thinking like, hey, I ordered the WWE Network because I wanted to see Survivor Series, but then when it comes down to it, I don't know if I really want to watch TLC. Maybe after the show, I'm going to go to WWEnetwork.com and I'll cancel my subscription, not really needing it for the month of December, but they're going to be debuting a whole bunch of shows. Two of the shows are one of the reasons why I really love the WWE Network. I know that I subscribe to the Stone Cold Steve Austin podcast. I listen to Stone Cold Unleashed. I listen to both of the shows. I can get both of them through iTunes, and that is good for me. But there's a thing that makes the podcast a little bit better, and that's seeing it live on the big screen. And they announced two of the upcoming guests for the Stone Cold Steve Austin podcast. They made it seem like this is going to be coming up within a couple of weeks, so I don't know if this is going to be playing in the month of December. But the one thing that I could tell from the commercial was that these were taped. They're not going to be live as they were in the past. I would like to say that maybe, Vince McMahon and the people, the powers that be in WWE and the WWE Network land, maybe they didn't like what happened between Stone Cold Steve Austin and Paul Heyman, where they sort of booked the Brock Lesnar match for WrestleMania, even though this was never on the plans according to WWE, and it made them very mad. Maybe they decided maybe if they went in and they taped these shows and they had them in the can, they could go in and they could edit anything that ever came up on the podcast that they didn't like, or maybe, they could fit the time a little bit better, seeing how they like to keep things on the hour. If you remember back to last year's Survivor Series, they were saying that they were going to have a interview with Vince McMahon and the winning team, that would have been Team Cena, at the end of Survivor Series, but they just ran out of time, and even though they plugged the hell out of it for 3 hours on the pay-per-view, they just didn't show it because of the fact that they didn't want to screw up their times on the WWE Network, and they according to everybody, they shot this thing. They just never aired it because they didn't want to mess up the WWE Network schedule, which makes it kind of funny. So maybe they'll have the overrun on Monday Night Raw, and then they'll be able to have the show last from the time that Raw ends until the top of the hour, and they don't have to do any screwy things in order to make things fit. I don't know. I turn on the live stream from time to time. Most of the time when I go to the network, I'm going to watch a certain show on demand, and it is what it is. But the two guests that are going to be on the Stone Cold Steve Austin podcast are Shawn Michaels and Ric Flair. Two of these guys have been on the show in the past. Shawn Michaels was one of the first guests of the Stone Cold Steve Austin show back in the day when Austin basically just read their Wikipedia page and said, You've been 6-time champion, huh? Tell me about that. It was back in the day when the show was very bad. And honestly, Stone Cold Steve Austin, since about WrestleMania 30 time, is when the show started to really hit the ground running. It's talked about getting Shawn Michaels back on the podcast. Said that it's been hit and miss. He said that he was going to go out with Shawn and they were going to go hunting and maybe try to get something done around there. And Austin basically tells you what's going on his life from week to week, and most of the time, even if the interview is in the can from the past, his intro is sort of live to the date, so you can sort of get a feel for what Austin's doing in his day-to-day life. As far as I know, he's never hooked up with Michaels since then, and that's a long time being there on the run. But the Ric Flair podcast is going to be very good because I know that it was probably in the can. They probably did this when Austin was doing a lot of press for the WrestleMania 32 tickets coming out a few weeks ago, because it seemed like he did a lot, and he was on Monday Night Raw in Dallas, and then, of course, he was at the Dallas ticket party, and, this, that, and the other. He was doing lots of things for WWE around that time, but when it comes down to it, Ric Flair's a lot in the press because of what happened on Monday Night Raw between Charlotte and Paige, involving his son Reed, and Rick being very outspoken about the company, basically saying that it was Vince's fault that this happened, and just saying that there's no way for Charlotte to get out of this because basically if she says something, it's up to her, and her job's on the line, and she's going to be in a lot of trouble. If you go back and you think about when the weekend of SummerSlam, not this one, not the last one, but the year before, the one where Jim Ross got fired. Everybody knows that Jim got fired because Rick, started running his mouth, and I think that it involved Reed as well. But he had been drinking, and Jim didn't speak up to try and save it. This was a sponsored event instead of a WWE event, and it made WWE think that they looked bad in the eyes of the video game people and things like that. But Stone Cold Steve Austin did a podcast with Ric Flair that weekend, and basically they were very vocal about how much they were drinking during that show. They had tons of beer in the room. They were pounding the beers. They were counting the beers as they were going. That one was a very good interview. And I know that when WWE Network gets these guys onto the podcast with Stone Cold Steve Austin, they sort of throw out the fact that they've been on the podcast before, and they like to walk down memory lane and sort of talk about all the accomplishments. If Austin and Flair just get to have a shoot the shit back and forth sort of deal, it's going to be a very good show. But if not, we've seen so many documentaries on Ric Flair. It's going to be hard for us to get ground running if he's just talking about things that we've seen and heard of 1,000 times. But both of these interviews, Flair and Shawn Michaels, going to be very good for the upcoming Stone Cold Steve Austin podcast on the WWE Network.